All right, let's talk about how to calculate your macros for fat loss. So, your macros. Just kidding, your calories. Most people, when it comes to counting their macros, don't take into account that your macros come from your calorie needs. You don't just get these random numbers from people online that say, eat this much protein, this much carbs, this much fat, when they're telling you to the gram what to eat. That's based on probably their goals or their clients' goals, and they're not based on yours. So you need to figure out exactly what your calories should be. Because on top of that, when people just jump into macro counting, even let's say their numbers are perfect, okay, it usually doesn't go well because it's like jumping into the deep end without any skills on how to swim, like eating skills or knowing where to get your sources of protein, carbs, and fats from. There's no swimmies, there's no coach in the water, there's no instructor in the water. For that reason, many people just jump right in and have no clue and then they drown. And they're like, oh, macro counting doesn't work. When it's like, no, it does. You just got to learn how to do it. So before we jump into any calculations or anything like that, we need to understand where the calorie requirements come from. So, how many calories you burn in a day come from four different sources. There's your basal metabolic rate, your non exercise activity thermogenesis, thermic effect of food, and your exercise activity thermogenesis. Now, for anybody who is listening on the podcast, just know I'm going to be referring to graphics a lot during this. So, if you want to see what I'm talking about and see the images that I'm showing, then be sure to get your butt in the Fit 40 Family Facebook group or check the video out on YouTube. And for anybody joining us from the Fit 40 family or on YouTube, I hope you enjoy the graphics. So, back to the calories. When it comes to your basal metabolic rate, that makes up about 70% of all of the calories you're going to burn throughout the day. That's 70. Okay. And this is your resting energy expenditure. So, this is the amount of calories you burn without doing anything. So, if you were to lay in bed all day and do nothing at all, that would be how many calories your body needs just to survive and do its thing. Next is non exercise activity thermogenesis. This is the second biggest piece of the pie, and it's about, say, 15-ish%. This is the unintentional activity you do throughout the day that wouldn't be deemed like intentional exercise. So things like talking with your hands, tapping your foot, and things like that. It makes up a very big portion of the burned calories because it's something that we do all day. It's not just an hour. It's what are you doing for the 10 to 12, whatever hours you're not sleeping and not exercising. Okay. Next is the thermic effect of food, which just like it sounds, it's about food. So it's the amount of calories we need to eat, digest, and excrete all the food that we take in. And that's another 10-ish%. And then that last 5-ish% is exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is why you cannot outwork a bad diet. No matter how hard you push on that exercise, no matter how much you burn yourself out and grind yourself into the ground with that exercise, you can only get so much out of it. And even if you do overdo it and you do burn more calories from that, then the chances of your body compensating and decreasing something like your non exercise activity thermogenesis is a very real thing. This happens a lot with the people that exercise 7 times a week, twice a day. They just burn themselves out and then they move less throughout the day. So they feel like crap. They're burning less calories and they're not getting the results that they want. So that explains for a lot of people in that situation. All right. So, how do we calculate your calories? There's three options when it comes to calculating a calorie deficit. Option number one is taking your goal body weight and multiplying it by 10 and then giving yourself like a 200 calorie buffer because ranges are where we want to be. If you're aiming to hit the exact same number day after day after day, when it comes to calories, that's going to burn you out and it's going to be very, very hard. When it comes to calories, also, it's a very inexact science. So when I say that, I'm not saying that calorie counting is pointless or anything. I'm just saying that it's more about being in the ballpark as often as you can, not hitting it precisely every single time because food labels are not 100% accurate. Calorie counters are not 100% accurate. So that being said, let's stop stressing over being perfect and just be in the ballpark. Um, so we got that goal body weight times 10 plus 200 for the range. Option number two is calculating your basal metabolic rate and then giving yourself a 200 calorie range. And option number three is taking that basal metabolic rate, multiplying it by an activity factor, and then taking away 500 to 250 calories. So let's run through them all with this example. So we have a 40-year-old woman who's about 5'3", current weight is 220 pounds, and she wants to be 200 pounds. So goal body weight times 10. You just take that 200 pounds, multiply it by 10, you got 2,000 calories. And then you got the 200 calorie buffer. So 2,000 to 2,200 calories is your calorie deficit. Bing, bang, boom, done. Simplest way is to do it this way. Now, there's the option number two, which is your basal metabolic rate and then a 200 calorie buffer. So take your current body weight. So for this person, 220 pounds, and your basal metabolic rate would be about 1,600 calories. So we have 1,600 calories plus that 200 calorie buffer, which is 1,800. So 16 to 1,800 would be your calorie deficit for this method. And number three, we have your BMR, basal metabolic rate, times your activity level, and then take away 500 to 250 calories. So we have that basal metabolic rate, which is still 1,600. And let's say you don't want to do any exercise at all. That would mean you multiply by an activity factor of 1.2. Now, when it comes to your activity, you multiply on a scale between 1.2 to 1.9. 1.9 is for like triathlon people, marathon people, people that do the exercising 2-3 times in one day. Most people are not that. Okay. 1.2 is doing absolutely nothing. So let's say you just show up to work, come home, sit on the couch. That's pretty much the only activity you have throughout the day. Okay. If you were to do that, you'd multiply by 1.2. So 1,600 for your basal metabolic rate times 1.2 is 1,920. So that's your maintenance now. That's how many calories you would need to sustain your activity and your body throughout the day with zero exercise. So we have to create a deficit. How we do that is we take away 500 calories if we want to lose a pound of body weight per week. Only issue with that is that when we take 500 calories away from 1920, we get 1420, which is under that 1,600 basal metabolic rate. When we go under your basal metabolic rate, this is where stuff usually doesn't go that well. It usually results in things like extra hunger, intensified cravings, more mood swings, and potentially, if you go too low, things like hair loss or issues with like hair, skin, and nails and things like that. So everybody right now who's doing Ozempic or tirzepatide or any of those things that are the GLP-1 meds, a lot of people are experiencing this where they're not getting hungry, so they eat nothing, which results in barely eating like 1,000 calories. And they're starting to see all of this stuff happen because of malnutrition. So you don't want to put yourself in that situation. Now, let's say you do the smart thing, and instead of taking away 500, you take away 250. So we're expecting half a pound per week instead of 1 pound per week. So it's not going to be as fast, but we're doing the smart thing and putting our health first. So we end up with 1,670, which is above that BMR, which is great. However, with that 200 calorie buffer, because we want to keep a good range here, okay, if you give yourself that 200 calorie buffer, that's 1,870. So we're really close to that 1,920 mark. And more likely than not, we're just going to keep going into maintenance over and over and over again, and you're not going to see any results. So let's add a little activity in there, not just for the fact that you can eat more while losing weight, but also for the other benefits, like the cognitive benefits, like the fact that when you exercise, it increases your chances substantially for keeping the weight off long term. So if you're actually interested in keeping your results, exercise is one of those things that's pretty much a necessity. Now, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. This is just 1 to 3 days of light exercise. That could be 1 to 3 days of taking an intentional 30-minute walk or getting a workout once or twice a week. Okay. That would result in multiplying our BMR by 1.4 instead of the 1.2. So that 1,600 multiplied by 1.4 is 2,240. So now that's our maintenance calories because you have to fuel that activity that you're doing now. When you take away 500 calories, that gives us 1,740. So that's well above our 1,600 mark. And if we stick to the range of 1,700, we'll we'll round down for this, make it easy. Okay, so we'll say our range now is 1700 to 1900 calories. So even if we were on that upper end, that 1900, that's still very far away from that 2240 number. So even if you were to eat up in that upper end of the range, you're going to be still losing body fat, still losing weight, and you won't constantly put yourself into maintenance over and over again. All right. Now, my preferred method is the BMR plus 200. Okay. Because that puts you, or sorry, I skipped ahead. Let's back it up. So I know a lot of you are probably asking, wait, that's a bunch of different numbers. Which one should I do? Okay. Well, obviously now you know my preferred method, but when it comes to the way that it breaks down, so to recap, when it comes to body weight times 10, that's a range of about 2000 to 2200 calories. BMR plus 200 is about 1600 to 1800 calories, and BMR times activity ends up being 17 to 1900 calories. Now, my preferred method is the lowest one, the 16 to 1800, as opposed to 17 or 2000. So, reason being, when it comes to how us humans report our calorie intake and our exercise, it usually ends up being that we, let me quote it directly here. Okay, underreport actual food intake by an average of 47, give or take 16%. So that could, for some people, end up being, what would that be? On the upper end, that could be a difference, 47 plus 16. So some people were off by 63% of their calorie intake. So let's say you were aiming for that, say, we'll say 16 or sorry, 1200, because everybody's convinced they're eating 1200 calories. So we'll multiply that by what? 0.63 plus 1200. Okay, so people saying that they're eating about 1200 calories are probably eating closer to 2000. So if your basal metabolic or if your maintenance calories are not are around 2000 calories, then you're not going to lose any weight. And people keep going through this cycle over and over again of, oh my God, I'm eating 1200 calories, but I'm not losing any weight. This is probably why. It's not because you're some magical being that all of a sudden your body is just doesn't, none of the rules of energy balance or anything like that apply. You just are a special unicorn. Okay. It's probably not that. And also, they're over-reporting their physical activity by about 51%. And that's plus or minus, geez, 75%. My God. Um, yeah. So when it comes to that, a lot of people will go to the gym and they're like, but I'm working out. And they're using the same 5, 10 pound weights and they're not really challenging their body to actually change or burn more calories. So they're like, well, I'm checking the box, I'm showing up, but they're not putting the effort in that's needed to actually make a change. So if that's you, I'm not coming at you saying, obviously you're not doing what you need to be doing. It's just let's bring a little bit more attention to that and a little bit more awareness. And you now have the power to make a change, which is awesome. Okay, so most people struggle because when it comes to actually weighing their food, they don't use a scale. They just use measuring cups, they eyeball it, or if it says, oh, one serving size is 10 pieces, they just measure it that way. But then when you measure it by the gram, it's totally different. So when you are doing calorie tracking, try and measure to the gram or to the ounce because that's the most accurate way to do it. Now, when I say that, people are like, oh, it's going to take so much time. Well, we've actually figured out that if you were to add up how much time it takes to weigh your food and track it, it only takes about an additional 5 to 10 minutes out of your day. Now, that's assuming that you're not making crazy long recipes that require you to input 20 different ingredients every time. Don't do that to yourself. Just get recipes online that already have macros on them, or try and stick to simpler recipes. Or if you do want to do a homemade one, make sure that you put it into your tracker and you save it so you don't have to constantly do it over and over and over again. Most trackers have copy and paste functions, they have recipe inputs, they have these things that allow you to do it. So it takes a fraction of the time. That first time, probably going to be annoying, but every time after that, not even close. Next is not counting little treats, grabbing a little piece of candy here and there, grabbing a handful of nuts. Okay, that stuff adds up. That could easily be another 500 to 1,000 calories per day. If you don't believe me, track every little thing and see what happens. I literally, as I say this, I got a message from not even a client, but one of the Fit 40 members that we did a free strategy call with. And I told her, like, hey, you got to really track everything. And she's like, yeah, actually, I have been grabbing some stuff here and there, like a Tootsie Roll here and there. And I'm like, hey, just as a fun little experiment, just put that into the tracker. Just see what happens and where you end up. And she got back to me. She's like, holy crap, that's a lot of calories. And I'm like, yeah, it is. Now, again, this isn't like criticizing. This is just, hey, you have the power, you have the knowledge. Let's apply it and let's make the difference that you want to see now going forward. Um, Next is not preparing most meals at home. When you are not in control of the food that you're eating, chances of the calories being higher than even it says on the menu are way higher. Okay, so we're going to go over that in a little bit more detail. I've really tried to understand where they're coming at with this, but for the life of me, I cannot figure it out because it makes zero sense to eat back your exercise calories, especially when you do that, it pushes you into maintenance. So at the very best, you're maintaining your weight, and at the worst, you're gaining weight. So turn off the exercise calorie function. Now, when it comes to actually reporting your food intake, or sorry, when it comes to the restaurants, I'm getting ahead of myself here. When it comes to the restaurants, okay, most people don't understand how much of a difference it makes when we actually measure how many calories are in these meals. So, when actually studied, they found that the calorie content was usually about 175 calories, 259 calories, or even 175 calories above where they said. Okay, so when it comes to eating out, just know you're going to actually end up eating a lot more than you think you are. Now, another interesting thing here is that it says when the size of the meal was increased, the amount of calories that it increased as well was substantial. So basically, it was saying that the bigger the meal, the more likelihood that you're getting even more calories more than you think you are. And I think Anthony Bourdain explains it pretty well. For anybody who doesn't know, Anthony Bourdain, rest in peace, he was a famous chef that, I mean, he went around the world tasting the most delicious stuff. He cooked in some of the finest restaurants, and he said it best. He said, as a chef, I'm not your dietitian or your ethicist. I'm in the pleasure business. And that's literally all chefs should care about is making delicious food that people want to come back to eat over and over and over again. But you as the consumer need to know that, hey, their priorities don't line up with your health goals. So, if that's the case, if you go out, just make sure it's an occasional thing, not, oh, me and my family go out 2, 3, 4 times a week, or I order DoorDash pretty much every day for lunch. That's an easy way to mess up these calculations and leave you getting pissed off and feeling like you're not making any progress. Now, when it comes to the exercise calories, these calculations that I just gave you do not include exercise calories being eaten in addition to that. For most people, it usually results in you staying in maintenance, like I just mentioned, or even gaining weight. So get rid of those exercise calorie calculations. Now, some important notes. Macro counting is completely pointless if we can't stay within a calorie range. So if you're trying to count your macros, but you can't hit your calories at all, then what are we doing here? Like, it's not going to make a difference if you keep going over your calories over and over again. And your macros are going to be impossible to hit if you go over your calories. Because, like I said, your macros make up your calories. Okay. Macros are calculated by the amount of calories you consume. Yeah, sorry. I got to really hammer that home because the macro math, the way that it breaks out, is that we have protein, carbs, fats, and alcohol. They all contain calories. They're all macronutrients. Okay. Protein, every gram is 4 calories. For carbs, 1 gram equals 4 calories. For fats, 1 gram equals 9 calories. And then when it comes to alcohol, 1 gram is 7 calories. So if you're to look at your nutrition label and you were to do all the math on that, it would roughly come out to around the calories that it says. Now, will it be exact? No, because in the US, for example, they round to the nearest 5 or 10 calories. So it's not going to be exactly precise, but if your tracker allows you to track by the macro rather than the calorie, go by that because that'll be more precise. All right. Now, the most important macro to focus on is your protein. And ideally, we want about 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of goal body weight or lean body mass. So goal body weight is a good shorthanded way of getting around what your lean body mass probably is. It might even be over that, but if we're talking about protein, over consuming is never a bad thing because they've tested this, the upper limits to get people to eat 2-3 grams per pound of goal body weight, which is borderline impossible. I can't even imagine how they did that. And there were no negative effects from that. There's really nothing to worry about when it comes to this, as long as the saturated fat content isn't through the roof. So if it's lean protein sources, you're good to go. But if you have access to a DEXA scanner or an in-body scanner and it lets you know your lean body mass number, then just go by that. Now, when it comes to carbs and fats, tracking carbs and fats for most people is way more stress than it's worth. Okay. Here's here's another study. So when it comes to high carb versus low carb, high fat versus low fat, they've literally done studies where they compare the two and they're like, what's the difference? Is there any benefit? Is there any detriment? Like, what is the deal? And they found that when it comes to body mass or your weight, no significant changes were found when low carb was compared against high carb. For anybody looking right now and seeing me pointing this out, LC is the scientific way of abbreviating low carb, or at least in this study in particular, and HC means high carb. And then over here, when it comes to body fat and visceral fat, no significant changes were found. And that's compared to the control group, which was literally just, hey, eat ad libitum, which is the sciencey word for saying whatever the heck you want. Just by people being in the study and knowing that they're being looked at, they actually ended up eating better and losing body weight and losing body fat. So that just tells you right there, when you have another pair of eyes on you, like a coach, for example, you're more likely to eat less food because you know somebody's going to be looking at it. Okay, now when it comes to carbs and fats, when it comes to carbs in particular, just make sure most, if not all of them, contain fiber. This is what we call complex carbohydrates, as opposed to simple carbohydrates, which are like the sugars and things like that. Now, if you have sugar every once in a while, is it a big deal? No, just no. I know that there's a lot of people out there saying sugar's the devil and everything, but that usually comes with them not explaining that the dosage makes the poison. Okay. When it comes to carbohydrates, if you eat nothing but sugar, yeah, that's probably going to negatively impact your health. But if you eat mostly fibrous carbs and you have a cookie once in a while, or if you have like an end of the day treat, like I have ice cream, like Yasso 180, 150 calorie pop pretty much every single day, but the rest of the carbs throughout the day have fiber in them, then you're going to be totally fine. It's what you do most of, not what you have every once in a while. And then when it comes to fats, same concept. Just make sure most, if not all, are mono or polyunsaturated fats. Ideally, monounsaturated. Those are things like avocados, olive oil, things like that. And also making sure that less than 10% of your calories coming from saturated fat. This is where a lot of people, especially in like the carnivore community, see the negative effects on their blood lipids, because when you take in a ton of saturated fat, then that negatively impacts your lipid profile and could potentially put you at risk for a cardiac event or something like that. So we don't want that to happen. Now, and also, this is another reason to track your food, just to get an idea of, okay, how much is coming from saturated fat? So you can see, okay, this is like in Chronometer, what I use, it'll show you percentages of your daily intake, and it'll say if you're over or under, and this could be very, very helpful. So when it comes to the carbs, the fiber sources that are the best, the ones that you can pretty much eat on a daily basis and improve your health are fruits, veggies, whole grains, potatoes, lentils, nuts, and seeds. Okay. Now, some of these are fat sources too. So you get two for the price of one, like nuts and seeds. As you'll see here, some healthy fat sources are nuts and seeds, fatty fish like salmon, oils like olive oil, avocado oil, sunflower oil, avocados themselves, and egg yolks. So, one of the best things to do when it comes to eggs, I know some people are sketched out because of the cholesterol, but just know dietary cholesterol does not have a direct effect on your actual blood cholesterol. It's very different, not very different. It doesn't have as much of an effect as most people think it does, because I'm going to cut myself off there. We're not going into that. But as it pertains to you, when it comes to egg yolks, one of the best things you could do is to just take one or two eggs and put that down and then beef it up with egg whites. So if you want to increase your protein intake, get some healthy fats and not go overboard on calories or anything like that, that is a good way to do it. So that is pretty much all you need to know when it comes to macros and to get yourself in an incredible situation to reach your goals, feel amazing, and improve your health. Now, if you are not already in the Fit 40 family, I highly recommend it to everybody listening on the podcast so you can catch trainings like this. And along with that, you get daily tips, these weekly trainings, and monthly challenges. We're actually in a protein challenge right now, and the ladies are absolutely crushing it. So if you're not already, get your butt in there. And for anybody who listened to this and they're like, this sounds awesome, it just sounds like a lot of numbers and I really don't want to do it for myself, that's totally cool. I do nutrition strategy calls 100% for free where I calculate them out for you. And we come up with a nutrition roadmap that you can follow for yourself. And along with this, it's no catch. There is no sale whatsoever. You won't hear me pitching you. It's literally just me helping you on this free call. I block out a couple of spots every week and I'm happy to do it. So if you want to grab one of those spots, you just go down into the show notes. You can set yours up right now. Or if you're in the Fit 40 family, just comment strategy and I will get in touch with you and we'll get you going. All right. Thank you guys for tuning in. I will see you all same place next week. Later.